Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Anita Bromberg. I'm Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. The CRRF is a Crown agency dedicated to building harmonious race relations right across this country. I'm very excited today to welcome Marina and Nemat to the first of what will be a series under the Our Canada banner. This series, called Author Series, will work to engage established and emerging Canadian authors from right across the country in discussions on literary works, both fiction and nonfiction, around issues falling within our mandate. In particular, the series will focus on building Canadian values through the voices of Canadian authors. Today's interview, as I say, is with Marina Nemat. She is the author of both The Prisoner of Tehran and her latest publication, After Tehran, A Life Reclaimed. So welcome, Marina.
Thank you for having me.
If you bear with me, I'm going to read a very impressive bio for our listeners here. Marina Nemat was born in 1965 in Tehran, Iran. After the Islamic Revolution of 1979, she was arrested at the age of 16 and spent more than 2 long years in Evin, a political prison in Tehran, where she was tortured and came very close to execution. She came to Canada in 1991 and has called it home ever since. Her memoir of her life in Iran, called The Prisoner of Tehran, was published in Canada by Penguin Canada in 2017 and has since been published in 28 other countries, and has been an international bestseller. In 2007, Marina received the inaugural Human Dignity Award from the European Parliament, and in 2008 she received the prestigious Grinzane Prize in Italy. 2008 and 2009 she was an Aurea Fellow at University of Toronto's Massey College, where she wrote her second book, After Tehran, A Life Reclaimed. That was also published by Penguin Canada in 2010. Marina regularly speaks at high schools, universities, conferences right around the world, and sits on the board of directors of the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture and on advisory boards such as the Action by Christians for the Abolition of Torture and PEN Canada. She teaches memoir writing in both Farsi and in English at the School of Continuing Studies at University of Toronto, and writes book reviews for the Globe and Mail. Again, welcome so much.
Thank you.
I read through your books and I've taken a look at your bio, and a few questions pop up to me that I thought we might sort of explore by way of background before we get right into the books. I understand that in your bio it speaks about the fact that both your grandmothers were from Russia. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your family's journey and how your family ended up in Iran.
Oh boy, it's a long story, but I'm going to make it very short. It seems like my family has been escaping one revolution after another. So my grandmothers and my grandfathers, on both sides, they escaped the 1917 communist revolution in Russia. And because both of my grandfathers were actually originally born in Iran, but when they were very young boys, there was a famine apparently, or that's what I've heard. And both boys, when they were very young, I mean probably around 10, 11, they just went to Russia for work, and that is where they stayed, and they made lives for themselves, and they practically became Russians. And they married Russian women who had been born in Russia. And then the revolution of 1917 happened, and it became obvious that they cannot stay. They wanted to go somewhere peaceful. So the logical choice for them was to go to Iran, which was a peaceful, relatively peaceful place at the time. And that is where they ended up. And, for a while, until 1979, actually, life wasn't so bad. We were a middle-class family, and we were just living our lives.
Well, and I noticed as I was reading a bit about your bio again that your mother and father, I perhaps exemplified the secular life that Iran was at the time. Your father, I understand, was a dance instructor?
Yes,
and
he
your
was.
mother worked as a hairdresser.
Yes, my father was actually one of the first people who brought modern dance to Iran. During the Second World War, there were a lot of foreign troops in Iran, and the people of Iran became very in the middle class and the upper class. They became very interested in learning to dance like the Westerners. So my dad took the opportunity and he started a dance class, and he actually did amazingly well. I mean, the studio was always crowded, and these were Muslim couples. But I mean, again, as you said, Iran at the time has secular laws. So simply because people were Muslim didn't mean that they were fanatical or anything. So people wanted to dance, people wanted to have a good time, and my dad was teaching them how to do that. My mother was a hairdresser. She was helping Muslim women look nice, and she was, putting makeup on them and making their hair nice and putting nail polish on them. It was almost an idyllic life.
And then you're in high school, and something changes dramatically. Your life changes dramatically. What year would that have been?
Well, I was 13 when the revolution succeeded. 1979, I was 13 years old. So I was actually in junior high, but junior high and high, in my case, my school, which was called Anushirawan Dadgar, is a Zoroastrian school for girls. It was junior high and high together, so I was in the 8th grade when the revolution of 1979 officially succeeded in February.
And now we know a bit about your story that you were arrested while in high school at the incredibly young age of 16. I have children younger than that. I can't imagine what that must have meant to your parents, never mind the shock of a country that goes such a dramatic change. But to have their own daughter arrested, tell us about that time for a moment, and what prompted the arrest?
I was always a loudmouth. I wasn't disrespectful, but from when I was very young, if I felt that an injustice had occurred, I could never shut my mouth. So I had a history of it, and it wasn't disrespect, but it was that I would, if this happened in school, I would certainly take a step forward. If it happened during class, I would raise my hand, I would say something respectfully, but I always said something. So, I guess it was just who I was. And when the revolution happened, it promised the people of Iran freedom and democracy. We had personal freedoms during the time of the Shah, but we didn't have political freedoms. But of course, I was 13. What did I care about political freedoms? I cared about dancing and singing and looking pretty. And that I had. But then, I guess after the revolution, for a while, we did have some freedom in the sense that a revolution had just happened. So the new laws were not written yet. And it took a while for them to be written. So for that short period of time, a few months, there was actually freedom. People were talking about social justice and freedom and democracy and ideology and all of that. And I was very immersed in that with my friends. But then those laws were written and they became implemented. And that is when we began to lose the rights that we were so accustomed to. So not only we didn't gain political freedoms, our personal liberties were taken away, and the hijab became mandatory, and our teachers were being replaced by fanatical young women, members of the newly formed Revolutionary Guard, and these young women were not qualified to teach. They were there to implement the Iranian Cultural Revolution, and we didn't like it. It wasn't so much political, but it was about the fact that I didn't want to look ugly. I wanted to wear nice clothes. I wanted my hair to look nice. I wanted to put on makeup. I wanted to go to school looking good. And it had become illegal. And the principal stood at the entrance of the school with a bucket of dirty water. And if she suspected you had makeup on your face, she would wash your face in a water that you didn't want to touch your face at all. So we became very angry, and we spoke against it. It wasn't just me. I was just one of many. And eventually, this led to the arrests of my friends and me. I wasn't the first one to go. So I literally watched my friends disappear. You would go to school and people wouldn't be there. And then you would ask around and you would discover that they were arrested at home the night before. And the same thing happened to me. They came for me on January 15, 1982. I was at home about to take a bath, 10 o'clock at night. The doorbell rang. My mother called my name, and I opened the bathroom door, and there were two really big guns pointed in my face. I was 16. I entered a state of shock. I didn't feel anything. My mom and dad were crying, and I guess, they were older, maybe they understood better, but emotions just evaded me. And I guess because I didn't really know what was happening. And I was scared. But again, there was this distance. It's like you're watching a movie. It was weird. And my mom and dad were crying, and I was thinking, you know what, you need to cry. It's not to be, I'm just getting arrested. Somewhere in me, I thought, this has to be a mistake. It was scary, but I thought, you know what, it is going to resolve because I haven't done anything.
Did you ever imagine that? I understand it lasted 2 years and torture and forced marriage, essentially?
No, I mean,
did you have any inclination that that's where the path would lead?
No, not at all. I mean, people had been arrested, but it had been a few months. And when you believe in your head that I haven't done anything wrong, I haven't hurt anyone, I haven't done anything, I have just talked and written about things, but no, I thought, they're going to take me, they're going to ask some questions, and well, it's unpleasant, but I thought, like, even staying there overnight was something I had not considered, I suppose, even though it was late at night, but I hadn't thought about it, about what could happen, and it just didn't fit in my imagination, which, by the way, is quite big, that this could end really badly.
So to jump forward a little bit, but what brought an end to it? What was your saving grace? Do you have any idea why you managed to get out of that? Well, you excuse the word hell.
I have met, like recently, ever since my books came out, I have had this amazing opportunity to meet again with some of my cellmates whom I hadn't seen or talked to since we were in prison so many years ago in the 80s. And everybody says the same thing, that it was the roll of the dice.
Right.
That when you entered Evin prison, Evin is still chaotic, but back then it was absolute chaos. The interrogators who worked there, they were violent men who were there for revenge. And they believed they did it for God or country or whatever they thought. And they were not afraid of doing anything. There was no law. There was no account. There still isn't. But back then it was even worse. It was absolute chaos. So it all depended if your interrogator was really irritated with you or not. Because if you irritated the interrogator, you would be executed. My very first friend who was arrested, Shahnush Besadi, she was arrested in October 1981, so about 3 months before I was arrested, and she was executed within days. So, and she hadn't done anything, just like me, and she was 15 when she was killed. So in the grand scheme of things, I guess in my case, one thing led to the other. I had an interrogator who was a very strange combination of good and evil. And most people are. I mean, most people are a combination. And in his case, what I guess I can be considered lucky is that he liked me. And he had this belief that he was there to save my soul or something, that I had been misguided. I was just simply a misguided person. And that he could save me from the grip of my very sinful life, in the sense that I was a Christian. So he wanted to save me. And I guess that's what really eventually led to my release.
You actually ended up marrying him.
Yes, I did. It was not uncommon in Evin prison, even though nobody talked about it. Sometimes girls would be called for interrogation at midnight, and they would be returned to the cell block at 5-6 a.m. with no visible torture signs. It was odd. And if you knew the girl, you would go up to her and you would say, "Hey, where were you last night? I should give you, excuse me, some lame excuse. Like, they took me for interrogation, nothing happened. That doesn't happen here. They take you for interrogation, something happens. But nobody wanted to talk about it, and I was called in for interrogation. It was 6 months after my arrest, and this interrogator Ali, he said to me, "Listen, you had a death sentence. I reduced this to life in prison, and you're going to become my wife, or I will arrest your parents." I put two and two together, and I said, "Okay, I don't want my parents arrested. Just leave them out of it. I'll do whatever you want me to do." He forced me to convert to Islam. I did. He changed my name and I became his wife, but I was still a prisoner. I was 17 years old and I had no say in it. I was basically under threat. So I accepted it. I just believed that, okay, this is the cards that I've been handed and I'm going to play them.
You just, in the way of summing a very difficult, painful time, I'm sure your interrogator eventually was assassinated himself, I understand.
Yes.
And you found the love of your life, and you married Andre Nemat, and now we're going to fast forward to how Canada welcomed you. You've documented both your time in Iran and your early years in Canada in your two books, and they're a fascinating read, of course. Tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write and share your stories. What one day you're working at Swiss Chalet, I understand,
Yes.
trying to figure out what Canada is, what freedom means, and you decide to write a book?
It's not that simple. When I was released from prison, I came home after 2 years, 2 months, 12 days. I sat at the dinner table with my parents. I was just shy of 19, and they talked about the weather. I had been gone in one of the most notorious prisons on the face of the planet, and people talked about the weather. People who loved me. People who had been devastated. I mean, my parents, we had very limited visitations, and my parents always bawled their eyes out when they came to see me. And now I'm back. And, I don't think I had any expectation. I mean, I had been in another galaxy in a way, and now I was back. And it was obvious that life wanted to go on. Life wanted to pretend that nothing was wrong, because if we acknowledge that, then we need to do something about it, and if you do something about it, you're going to go to heaven in prison. So naturally, we all just continued, and I didn't know this at the time, but I had post-traumatic stress disorder. But it was never diagnosed. I looked normal. I behaved more or less normal. And everybody thought, okay, thank God, it's over. Let's just live our lives. And I played that game. I got married. Andre was there, and we got married. We went to a remote city in Iran where he got a job at the university as a lecturer, to Zahedan, and it was a very quiet, very remote. I mean, oh boy, that's remote. At the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we were there for about 3 years, and then we got back, and the government of Iran was refusing to give me a passport. I kept asking. Finally, in 1990, I was released in 84. In 1990, they told me at the passport office, go to Evin, because they are the ones that they're saying you can't do. So I went to Evin. They asked for this huge sum of money. It was basically ransom, and I paid it. Basically, we gave everything we had. And I got the passport, and my husband and I, we knew we had no place in Iran anymore. I mean, I always felt I was under threat because I returned to my church. So it was a dangerous situation. I could have been arrested any moment. So we left and went to Spain. We couldn't come directly to Canada back then. It was very difficult. And Spain to Hungary because we had family there, and then finally to Canada. We arrived in Canada about a year later, and we had $200 left. My husband, he found a job very quickly. He's a very talented engineer. And gradually, it wasn't big pay, but gradually, I had a son, I had another one here, and I started working at McDonald's, and then at Swiss Chalet. I didn't even imagine for a moment going to university, because It was so expensive. And I had 2 kids. And I was a mother. And I was a wife. And those came first to me. I mean, I had to take care of my family. This wasn't about me going to school. So, but then gradually, working, my kids got older. I took some courses at U of T eventually. And then when I brought my parents here about a year after, less than a year, a few months after we arrived in Canada, because my brother was Canadian citizen, he sponsored them. We brought them. My mother became ill, cancer, and she died in 2000. And when I was sitting by her bedside, I was looking at her. But really, in all those years, we had talked about nothing but the weather. And I looked at this woman and I thought, oh my God, I have no doubt you love me. You're my mother, but you're literally a stranger to me. You don't know who I am at all. I didn't know who I was. And I had a nervous breakdown. I had a huge psychotic episode. I just lost it. It was really like watching a movie. And I started screaming, and it was at my mother's funeral after at my brother's house. And the screams were, apparently, I was told later, they were just so horrific that people got scared. They just started moving away from me, and I couldn't breathe. Anyhow, there was a doctor there, so she came to my aid. Then I went home, and it shocked me. I mean, I was normal. Why did I do that? That was not normal. Why did I do that? And I didn't even get a phone call from my family, from my brother. My husband, didn't say, honey, what the hell was that? Nothing. And that was when I felt betrayed. I had betrayed myself, my family had betrayed me, the country had betrayed me, and I was not going to settle. So I started writing. And of course, everybody said, oh, how cute is that? What a nice hobby you have. Nobody took me seriously. At the School of Continuing Studies, they took me seriously. I mean, my instructors, they were in awe at the story, at my ability to write and all of that. And I had no intention to publish. I mean, I thought, who's going to publish me? And I just wrote. And then actually the symptoms of PTSD became worse. I was having episodes. I had lost the ability to concentrate. I was losing it. And that was when I started talking to more people, and everybody said, well, as long as you're sitting on these secrets, my friends, my Canadian friends actually, they said, you have to come out. You have to make it known. And then one thing led to the other. The book got published. I started traveling. I started giving talks. And, I when I published the book, I thought, I will be normal. Once the book is out, once I get this burden down, I will be normal. I'm going to go get a dog. I always thought people who have dogs, they're normal people. I'm going to get a dog and be normal. And of course, the day has never arrived. And I have come to terms with the fact that I'm not normal. I will never be. And this is something I have to carry for the rest of my life.
But you're extraordinary.
William, there's always a part of you that wishes, no matter how I feel I owe who I am to all the bad things that happened, but a part of you wishes that those bad things had not happened, because it cost a lot of lives, and it still is. Maybe I would have felt better if Iran was better, if still people were not in prison. Maybe I would have felt better then. But the fact is that the same situation that killed my friends and devastated my life is still ongoing.
And that's why both books are such extraordinary pieces for us to learn about. We're talking in this series about the voice of the authors in what's best about Canada, Canadian values. So let's turn to that a little bit and get some reflection around that. Here you are, a woman with an extraordinary story, a woman from a family that has moved from country to country, and you're landing on the shores of a country you probably had limited English, I'm presuming. I'm not sure how your English was.
Not really. My English was, compared to most immigrants, I'm not saying it was perfect, but my English was good.
So what were as you're landing in Canada and getting your first job and trying to raise your children, What was your impression about Canada? What were your thoughts?
Planet Canada. That's the best way to describe it. I mean, you talk about going. You're talking now about going to Mars. You know, we want to get people on Mars. I mean, that was Mars. That was my Mars. You know, when that plane landed, I mean, looking around me, I might as well have been in a spacesuit. It was an absolute new thing. It was gravity was different. The sky was looked different. The sky was, yeah, it is. It's I believe it is. It's a different color, literally. And the grass was different. The plants were different. The birds were different. The way people talked was different. The way people behaved was different. I mean, everything about it was different. It felt extremely alien. And even though I was thrilled to be somewhere safe, to be out of Iran, to be with my family, and all of that, but there was this sense of foreignness that I knew I would get accustomed to, but it was I was out of place. And but I mean, again, you're a mother, you're a wife, you have a family that you need to take care of on another planet, and that's what you're going to do. You're going to take care of them. So I was focused on that. I was focused on taking care of my family, and I guess once that was taken care of, once we, you know, Andrea and I, we had jobs. Andrea had a very good job, relatively good pay, and the kids were older and they were in soccer and piano lessons. And I lived in a very suburban Canadian environment, and I said A after every few words. And, you know, I was using the same expressions, I was dressing the same way. Suddenly, one day I looked around me and I was Canadian. And I think that is when everything else began to crumble. And you know, my identity literally came into question, and I had time. I came out of survival mode. I think that is what Canada did for me. It helped me. It took years, not that it happened overnight, but you know, after those years, I exited slowly and painfully with psychotic episodes, my survival mode. And that was when I had time to look around and think and discover who I really am. It took a very long time, but Canada made it possible. Not easily, but the possibility was there, and this is why I'm here.
How how did you find uh, the task of reconciling yourself as an Iranian woman, as a Christian woman, um, to being Canadian? What was your thoughts around finding that Canadian identity within the context of your background?
It's amazing that you talk about the Canadian identity because I hadn't even thought about it that much. But now I think I know how it was at least defined for me. For me, it was more about when we got here when my brother was here. But my brother is my brother. He wasn't really a representative of Canada, even though he had been here for many years. He was my brother. So I didn't really look to him, I suppose, to find out what being Canadian meant. But it was more, first thing we did as Christians, so of course, we went to the church. And we became members of parish, and women in that parish, there was this woman, Flavia, she and Lynn and Flavia, they invited me to their homes. They befriended me. I didn't have a car. Lynn had kids who were more or less the age of my kids, and she would come and we would go to Canada's Wonderland. And I would go to her home. We had our first Thanksgiving at Lynn's house, and this was my very first Canadian Thanksgiving. I didn't know what it was, and then Flavia invited me to be a member of her book club because I told her I love to read. And she said, "Oh, I have book club." And I said, "What's a book club?" I didn't know. And she said, "Oh," and I thought, "Oh, what a great idea." And then I was invited. I was the only non-Canadian in that group. They were all Canadian women. And I looked up to them. I started reading what they were reading, and then I was very quiet during the first few meetings that they were discussing books. But then, and now looking back, I guess this is what I'm now trying to do for new immigrants and refugees in Canada. I work with them, but I try to befriend them. I take them out. You know, we try to become their friends. And I think that's the best way to become Canadian. When you exit your circle of comfort and you enter this other culture, and if that other culture is kind and inviting, it absorbs you. And I think that is what happened, through these friendships with other women, through book clubs, through church, and all of that. I gradually learned the customs and the ways of this country. And I learned that in this country, it was okay to say what you thought. That if you disagreed with others, it was okay to express your opinion. You wouldn't get in trouble for it. And that, again, that took a long time. But because of that, because of those friendships, because of that openness of these women in my community, after a few years with the book club, after a few years being at McDonald's, after a few years living in the suburbs, I was like them. I was one of them. I enjoyed the same things. My kids and their kids looked more or less the same. And I think that was what it was for me to be Canadian.
So now you've lived in Canada many years, and you're Canadian. You're a Canadian success story, a two-time Canadian author, a regular columnist almost for the Globe and Mail. And what do you think is that you would tell other Canadians never take for granted?
I work with refugees, and when working with them, I can see myself in them. To me, being Canadian means sharing what I have with others. I take being a volunteer very seriously. 80% of what I do is for no pay. I do it for free. Because I believe that the world, all that it suffers from these days, all the wars, all the poverty, the environment, you name it, all the problems we have is because of greed. Because those who have want more, and they don't want to share what they have. And again, I guess going back to my early days in Canada, the women that I met during those days, they were not rich women. They were middle class. They had their struggles, they had their jobs, they had their kids, they had their problems. But they shared what they had with me. They took me in their homes. They had, those days I always thought, how did they trust me? They didn't really know who I was. There is this element of not trusting other people when you are from a country like Iran, where you were betrayed and beaten and imprisoned and raped. You don't trust people. So it took a long time for me to, with the help of these women, to learn how to trust. And I know that that is one of the greatest obstacles when it comes to new Canadians. And I think as Canadians, not with words necessarily, but more with action, inviting people to come and share what we have. Yes, people gave to me, not money, but more time and energy and effort and kindness. And that enabled me to grow out of my trauma and become a successful Canadian. So I think that process is needed. And that is the most important part of it, regardless of the politics, regardless of everything. It is the human connection between those who have and those who have not. If we can build that bridge, not that it succeeds in every case, but it succeeds in many cases. And that has basically become a struggle, to create those bridges that allow people to cross over from a place where they do not trust to a place that they do trust. And that by itself enables them to actually succeed.
Interesting. So I'm going to put to you the word multiculturalism. We've done a recent survey that talks about multiculturalism as a value that Canadians almost take for granted, from what our survey showed. you, as with your experiences coming to Canada, have actually commented on it. I know a couple times. I read 2004 piece that you put into the Globe and Mail about a young student in York University who didn't want to do a seminar course where he was going to be in the room with other women, and you were quite critical of the university's position that was going to give him that space to do that. And reflect on where we are with some of the struggles that we're having around, you know, religion in the public sphere and multiculturalism, given your real experiences now translated here in Canada. If you could, for a few minutes before we close.
Absolutely. Multiculturalism is a very complicated word. I have traveled widely. I have given talks and worked in Europe, in many countries. In the United States, I'm going to the States when it's next week. Canada is different. The way our society works is very different from the way things are in most countries in Europe. I think we have a lot in common, for example, with a country like Norway, but still we are different. We are definitely very different from the United States. In Canada, now when I look at the circle of my friends, people that I get together for dinner with, my close friends, they are from all nationalities and religions. We are Christian, we are Jewish, we are Buddhist, we are Muslim, we are different kind of, all sorts of different kind, Sunni, Shiite, and atheists, and Zoroastrians, and Baha'i. When there is a dinner party at my home, people come, and I usually make, like for Thanksgiving, I make a very Canadian Thanksgiving. I make turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy, and people come from
and maple syrup.
Oh, well, not for Thanksgiving, but for breakfast, at my home. My husband doesn't like maple syrup for some reason. I love it, but we all come, and you would have somebody who wears the hijab, and you would have somebody very observant Jew, and you have somebody, I'm a Catholic, and then you would have, we would even have Christian ministers at the table. And yet, people do have heated debates, and they talk and they argue, but at the end, we laugh and we share the meal, and it's somehow
nobody gets arrested.
No, nobody gets arrested, and nobody, again, it's sometimes very heated, but there is a certain level of respect and understanding that, okay, we are disagreeing with each other and we cannot convince each other necessarily on everything, but that's all right. What I find, I think the dilemma right now going on, that you see it bubble up a lot, is how do you, nothing in this world is limitless. I have talked about this with my children. What is freedom? Does freedom mean that we can do whatever, anything, without any limits out there? When you drive, there are stop signs. And the stop sign means you come to a stop and you give another person the right of way. So how do we create these stop signs and traffic lights in our cultural, political, and religious sphere? The truth is that, yes, Canada, its law is a secular law. We don't have religious laws governing our country, but the fact is that many Canadians are religious people, whatever that religion might be. And a lot of times I find that actually my secular friends are the most fanatical people I have ever met, because they get offended when somebody, for example, believes in God. When I'm much more, as a person who believes in God, I'm much more tolerant when somebody says, I don't believe in God. He doesn't exist. I don't get upset about it at all. But they seem upset when I say I believe in God. So all of that comes into play. And then we hear, for example, recently the argument about the niqab. Right. That's a very clear. I'm actually working on writing a piece. I've been very busy, so it's taken me a while. But think, okay, how if we see ourselves as a multicultural country, how do we or do we not accommodate that? And to me, it's actually very simple. I have friends who wear the hijab, for example. I have friends who like their skirts short, and I have friends who like their skirts long. I have friends who wear boots. I have friends who don't. I have friends who like colors. I have friends who don't. I mean,
she wears long boots. I wear short boots.
There
There's
we
a
go.
song like
I mean,
that.
that is fine. And you know, I had this big, beautiful friend. She's now passed, but she was a Muslim woman, and she wore the most beautiful hijabs I have ever seen. I mean, these colorful headscarves, and she was just beautiful. She was like this beauty queen, and she was beauty itself. And she wore, and that's fine. And we got along absolutely beautifully. So that is fine, the way women want to dress, but we have to draw a line. Would I be allowed to enter a bank with a ski mask, cut my face covered? No, I wouldn't, because then my covering my face is an infringement on your liberties in the bank, right? Because if, heaven forbid, if I commit a crime, nobody is going to know who I am. But if you commit a crime, it's going to be obvious who you are and where you live, right? So there are certain stop signs that, not because we don't want to give certain liberties to certain people, but simply because those liberties would infringe on the liberties of others. Right. When I'm at the mall, when I go to the bathroom, if there's a woman with an niqab, I have to be honest, I get uncomfortable. What if it's a man? Mm-hmm. What if, if that person commits a crime, we have no way of identifying them. This is not about religion, because the niqab is not even religious. It's a cultural thing. There's nowhere in the Quran does it say you have to cover your face. Now, Prime Minister Harper, I know that he said that these women are oppressed. I'm sure some women who wear the niqab are oppressed, but are all of them? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Some of them have made that choice to wear it, but and I'm fine with that part of it. But the moment it infringes on my liberties, which it does, whether they like it or not, then I oppose it.
That's your stop sign.
That, yes, because this society, think about it. Then I should be able to carry a gun and go to the bank and just demand money. If there are no stop signs, we need stop signs. We need traffic lights, because without stop signs and traffic lights, there is chaos. But we need to define them, not based on anger or religion or what we like and what not, based on biases. We have smart people in this country. They should sit down and they should say, this is the limit, because when you go past that point, you're infringing on the liberties of others, and for good reason. So, again, multiculturalism, a lot of people think that it means anybody can do anything they want. No.
Right. Rights and obligations together. Thank you. I want to make note and turn to one quick question. March 21st is the International Day for the Elimination of Racism, an important day. We know a quick scan of recent stories in Canada that while we may be better than a lot of places around the world, we're still a place where racism happens, whether it's churches being vandalized, blacks in Nova Scotia not being respected in cabs, the Aboriginal women being subjected to murder and violence, Chinese residents on the West Coast feeling discrimination. The list goes on, and we're certainly not able to go through the whole list now. But we have our issues in Canada. So reflect with me as we close. Moving forward, what should Canada do as we mark March 21st? As a woman that's faced racism and hatred and built a wonderful life here in Canada, and as being an important voice, as you've been recognized. In fact, I noted it when I did your survey, your bio rather, that you've been recognized for what you've contributed to this dialogue. What could you impart on us moving forward, March 21st and beyond? What's the right steps in terms of fighting racism, making space for religious tolerance while respecting what multiculturalism is in Canada?
Well, there are certainly steps we need to take. There's no arguing. I mean, Canada is a good place. Canada is a good country. Canada is better than, I guess I dare say, at least most of the countries I have ever visited, and it's home. So it does matter. It matters a great deal to me. But we also have a long way to go. Violence against various religions, against various ethnicities, against gender, the women, is there, and in many cases is widespread. There is no arguing it. I think the very important first step when it comes to any of these issues, no matter what it is, whether it's women, it's indigenous women, if it's ethnicities and religion, is acknowledgement. I mean, one of the biggest problems I had all this time was that when my rights were taken away from me, when I was discriminated against, when I was put in prison, when I was beaten, when I was raped, there was no acknowledgement. Because when we acknowledge something, it means we are taking responsibilities. And I think it is very important that every Canadian understands that this country doesn't just belong to politicians. A democracy is not, as unlike popular belief, is not as good as its politicians. It's as good as every single one of its citizens. So every single Canadian needs to think about this, look around them, and see what the issues that are more pressing, most disturbing for them are, and acknowledge them in the form of a public forum. You get together for dinner with your friends. You go to a church meeting, you go to a synagogue, you go, get together at school, or, whatever that is, talk about these issues. And then put pressure on the politicians to do the same, to acknowledge them, because once these issues become the concern of the average voter, they become naturally the concern of the politicians. So if politicians, they see if they don't acknowledge a certain problem, they would not be re-elected or elected in the future, they would address those issues. So we need to take responsibility and acknowledge. And then the step after that is to come up with educated, realistic, non-emotional, non-partisan ways to address those issues. And not only because they would get us elected or re-elected, but because they are the right thing to do. One of the problems in democracy is that politicians don't usually see more than 1, 2, 3, 4 years in front of them. Election time, right? But we need to create a society that is responsible enough to put that aside and say, for example, the issue of indigenous women in this country is important. Mm-hmm. And it's beyond politics, it's beyond election. We need to do something about it. We have smart people in this country, we have educated people in this country. Bring them together in a bipartisan way, from all walks of life, from all political spectrum. Get them to sit down, real experts, and come up with a plan in the long run. Like I'm talking 20-year plans, right, not 4-year plans, to address these issues. And I think this is an area where we have fallen short. And we need to acknowledge it, and we need to create plans in order to push it forward.
So looking into the strategic plan for Canada, what's your strategic plan? What's next on your agenda?
Well, next on my agenda, there are many things. I'm working on a new book. It's historical fiction, but it deals with how the uphill battles that women face have not changed in the past 2,000 years. You would be surprised, but writing about first century, I'm writing about 3 women living in first century, and their challenges are the same as we face in many ways.
I can't wait to read it, because that's my favorite form of novel, I must say, historical fiction. There's so much you can do with it.
It's fun.
Well, Marina, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you. you've been generous not only with your time, but with your thoughts, very insightful thoughts that I know everybody that's going to have the opportunity to view this is going to appreciate and ponder it as we mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racism and beyond. You've provided us with some very thought-provoking points. So,
by the way, I'm sorry, March
Sure.
21st is also the Iranian New Year, so Happy New Year.
thank you for pointing that out. And that's the kind of thing in Canada that we all celebrate, and we need to keep it in front of us, that we all have celebrations and we can all have the opportunity to come together. Well, then Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Join us soon for our next author interview. Stay tuned to find out who that will be. And follow us on our social media channels. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.